Coming off the success of Bastard, Young-chan Hwang and Carnaby Kim are back with their follow-up, Sweet Home, about the story of a group of survivors trying to survive the monster apocalypse. Hyun Cha is one of those survivors, and after his family is killed in a head-on collision, he sells everything and moves to an apartment where he awaits the day he will commit suicide. But when the monster apocalypse occurs, he is forced to fight and live for the people who depend on him, all the while fighting the monster within himself. This is Sweet Home. Sweet Home is to me best compared to something that's not even a webtoon, but an American TV series and comic book, The Walking Dead. To me, it's taking a lot of the concepts and ideas and even a little bit of tone from that franchise and making it into a proper thriller kind of story that goes above and far beyond what The Walking Dead was able to achieve. Take, for example, the idea of the real threat not being zombies, but people, and that it isn't the zombies that are The Walking Dead, but the humans left alive. This concept in Sweet Home, however, is so much more better written out and delivers on it almost completely. Instead of the monsters just being monsters, it is their one true desire that turns them into a monster to begin with. This leaves a lot of room to delve into the monsters themselves, which almost never really happens in zombie stories. This is what makes Sweet Home the most unique. One of my favorite monsters in the series is our first monster that we see. She's a beautiful girl that is on a strict diet so that she can maintain her model-like figure. So when the monster apocalypse happens, she turns into a monster which wants to eat anything, and her hunger can never be quenched. This leads to a rather gruesome and disturbing confrontation between Hyun and the woman. I'll leave that up to you guys to read, though. Sweet Home is a story that's always striving to dive deeper into the topics and stories it introduces. In many ways, this is something Sweet Home has over their previous work, Bastard. One of the most fascinating ideas that comes from this webtoon is the idea of fighting oneself, or in other words, fighting the desires within us so that we aren't swallowed by them and become monsters to our desires. I believe there is a quote along the lines of, "He who makes a beast out of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man." The idea is similar here, but is forked off and approaches in so many different ways. For our main character Hyun, his one desire is to have a family. He wants the warmth and happiness which comes from that, as his whole family died in a tragic car accident, and his whole family they weren't really nice to him to begin with. But I also like that some characters in this webtoon don't have any issues at all with their desires and the monsters within themselves. I do believe this is because in some ways they are already at peace with them and don't have any desires which would turn them into monsters. This is evident with Jisoo, who never shows any signs of turning into a monster at all, despite her backstory being very sad. This creates a variety to each character, and while it's something you never think of during a chapter, after you read it, you will notice some of them just don't ever show those signs. But my favorite aspect of this story is that while we are in a way a slave to our human desires, that isn't all that we are. We aren't like those monsters that have had their life consumed by their desires, but we're just people trying to live with these monsters inside of us. And it's those desires in the first place which makes us human, and there is nothing to be ashamed of with that. We are flawed as people. We make mistakes. We bicker, argue, fight, war. But at the end of the day, we're just people all wanting to find a piece of something which will make us whole. Much like Hyun was by being an internet troll, he was a part of the problem, but he ended up redeeming himself and became a person worth saving, and found a cause worth fighting over and stopping the cycle of self-hatred and pity. Characters in Sweet Home are exceptional. Maybe some of my favorite characters they've created in some ways. I like how everyone in this group has some sort of development and never feels underutilized. This is an issue that can happen with these types of stories where plenty of characters feel like fodder for monsters, but in this instance, I never really felt that way. Not even for the monsters either, as they always felt like a unique challenge or threat for the characters, never feeling like yet another monster is there for them to defeat. Because of the story's pacing and care put to the characters and their development, we get very memorable moments for the most part. This webtoon makes you invested in these characters because their writing is solid and each character has layers. For example, Hyun is struggling with many things in the series. He comes from a broken home where his family didn't exactly treat him well or looked favorably upon him. He was estranged to the household he lived in and really was just a lost boy with no guidance to help him get back on the path of discovering his true self. But when the apocalypse rolls around, Hyun slowly transforms into a hero and into a person who realizes the error of his ways and realizes that no matter how much hurt he is feeling, that killing himself would be the wrong thing to do and that living is a better option than just ending it, even in this horrifying scenario of humanity turning into a bunch bunch of monsters and ending. Hyuk Lee is another character I thought was quite exceptional and showed a lot of grit and determination throughout the series. Hyuk is Yoon's older brother and he really wants to marry Seiba-san, so relatable goals. Anyway, he is the de facto leader of the group and is naturally just chosen as the leader by the people because, well, he just looks like a leader and he kind of acts like one. But throughout the series, Hyuk, while being a trusted leader of the group, will often be the one to take the most risks, but only if he thinks it will benefit them all in the end. Though often, the risk is put much more on him and the consequences spared from the others, usually. Hyuk is one of my favorites for a reason, and that's really just because he's a very solid character, with a great deal of development and depth. Then we have Jisoo, a 20-year-old woman and a fellow bass player. I just noticed I can relate to these characters quite a bit because Hyuk also likes Seiba-san like myself. Jisoo is the romantic interest for Hyun, sorta, though you really don't notice it much, because at first there aren't any signs they even like each other in that way. But their relationship develops so smooth and naturally. This is an aspect that is all throughout Sweet Home as a whole. Lots of characters develop over time, and by the end, they're completely different from where they started. Back to Jisoo though, I love her backstory quite a bit, though I won't say much. You'll have to read that for yourself. Overall, characters in Sweet Home are quite exceptional and are very enjoyable. They develop with the story and their arc flows very naturally and easy. Even secondary or background characters don't feel like just characters in the background. There's so much more than monster fodder, and that's something that Sweet Home has over comparable series like it. If you're hoping Sweet Home has characters like Bastard does, with the quality of writing and depth, then you're in luck because Sweet Home is pretty much a near match to Bastard's quality and character writing. I've always been a massive fan of the art for Bastard, how they're able to have such memorable designs along with creating art that suits the needs of the story. For Sweet Home, there are a wide variety of emotions which are needed to be hit to make sure that everything is cohesive, whether it be Jisoo with her memorable rock and roll scene or Jisoo crying out for Hyun. These characters need to be expressive on the most opposite spectrums at times, but as well be able to express the more subtle emotions like when Jisoo and Hyun promise to write a song with one another. Sweet Home more than delivers and is another improvement from Bastard's art, which honestly didn't think was possible, but I also find the designs of each monster to be unique and horrifying in their own ways. For example, I love the use of more comedic elements in the monster designs, which in the end add to the horror the series pretty much already does really well. The protein monster is the best example of that because you look at him out of context and, well, he's kind of hilarious. This giant, gray, muscular monster with a smiling face that looks like he just ate a lot of peanut butter and he's just so happy. I mean, come on, that's just great. But a great use of horror is to take the comedy and hilarity of something and twist it to a horrifying degree. This is because you're taking something pure, something not related to horror, and kind of defiling it, turning it into something to be scared of. It seems with Sweet Home, they learned from Bastard, which is already, in my opinion, their best work anyways, but Sweet Home is really giving Bastard a run for its money in many different aspects. In my opinion, enjoy this moment with Sweet Home and Bastard, because at this point, I'm not exactly sure how anyone, even their own creators, could top these two stories. And to be honest, I simply can't tell you what's better between the two. That conversation will have to come in time, as we can't be sure what Sweet Home's impact will be until possibly years after its release. But as of right now, we will see if Sweet Home impresses years after. But yes, Sweet Home has probably entered into my top 5 favorite webtoons. Pretty much, really in my top 3. So yeah, absolutely give this webtoon a 100% recommendation. I want to say thank you all who watched this video. This video took me a while to get out. Actually, I intended it to be out much earlier, but things fell through, things happened, things got in the way, but it's all right. The video's still out. So if you watched it and you enjoyed it, thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. Make sure to give this video a like, subscribe, ring the bell. I have a Patreon, I got a Teespring, everything you need to know in the comments below. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.